internet celebrity Andrew Tate was a former kickboxer, four-time world champion with a record of 76-9, or 43-9. But what's certain is that he had 9 losses. Tate was knocked out only one time, as he says, but everywhere it is stated that he was knocked out 3 times. This is the whole problem with Andrew. His interviews contradict each other, the record is constantly changing, and the useless ISKA organization, according to him, is the mecca of kickboxing. Therefore, now I will analyze Tate's career in detail, after which we will analyze his skills. Spoiler: Andrew's fans won't like the verdict. Career. In 2005, Tate started practicing martial arts. In November 2008, Tate was ranked 7th best light heavyweight kickboxer in Britain by the International Sport Kickboxing Association, or ISKA. But this is where the problems start. It's hard to find all of Tate's fights. If you count only documented fights, then his record is 25-9. Even if you don't search for all the fights, but only title fights, many are still simply not available on the network. Let me remind you that we live in a time when the first title fight of Joe Louis against James J. Reddick, which took place in 1937, is in the public domain. There is even a version in color. However, anything can happen. Perhaps the records are really lost. So let's look at who he fought in title fights. After all, these are fights for the world title. The first attempt was successful. In 2009, Tate won by knockout in the 5th round and became the English champion of ISKA in cruiserweight. There's no information about the opponent he defeated, except for his name, Paul Randall. In the next fight, Andrew took another IKF British cruiserweight title. This time, more information about the opponent. This is Daniel Hughes, but nothing is known about his merits in kickboxing. The only mention of him is as a boxer. In this sport, he has a record of 12-3. In 2011, an attempt to take a 3rd title was not successful. Tate was already the English ISKA champion, but wanted to take the vacant world title. This was prevented by Jean-Luc Benoit, a man about whom there is not much information, but all of it is polar. One resource says that Jean-Luc Benoit is a fighter with a record of 2-1. Out of 3 fights, 2 were against Andrew. The second resource says that at the moment his record is 31-13, although it's most likely the truth is in the middle. The rematch was organized immediately, where Tate won by knockout in the 8th round, after which a title drought set in for him. Andrew will lose 3 title fights. First, he lost a decision to Vincent Petitjean, a fighter with a blurred past. One resource says that his record to date is 2 wins, 2 losses. Another resource says that he has 60 wins and 5 losses. But the problem is that the same resource says that he's 190 centimeters tall. That is, he's as tall as Tate. You may have already noticed, but let's just say he is slightly lower than Andrew. In other words, you cannot trust this resource 100%. The second consecutive defeat in the title fight occurred in 2012 against a serious opponent, the Armenian Sahak Parparian. This is the first opponent in Tate's career, the level of which is not to be doubted. His record is 50-14. But most importantly, during his career, he managed to fight with really top opponents in the best promotions in the world. For example, he managed to defeat Jason Wilness at Glory, who will become the champion there in the future. But Sahak himself failed to win the title, as he lost in the final of the tournament to Alex Pereira. Tate's last title loss came the same year against Francis Gray, an opponent with a level below the previous one, but he managed to knock out Andrew with a knee. In 2013, Tate apparently changed his approach to fights and managed to revenge his defeat to Vincent Petitjean, for which he became the ISKA World Full Contact Light Cruiserweight Champion. Following him a year later, Andrew fought for the title against Wendell Roach, an unremarkable fighter who did not fight in serious leagues. His record seems to be 53-22, but finding his wins is many times harder than his losses. However, Andrew told his audience the victory over him was an incredible achievement, because he was the first to knock him out. Yes, this is true, but this achievement is not so impressive given the fact that Roach had almost 20 defeats at the time. This ended the title win streak. Young Ibrahim El Bustati managed to take the Infusion Live World Light Heavyweight title. But if you notice, wherever Tate talks about his kickboxing past, he always puts the emphasis on his ISKA titles. What is ISKA? How important is this league that Andrew constantly mentions it? ISKA. If you like my content and want to get early access, you can visit my Patreon. There you can find not only YouTube boxing videos, but more, like MMA breakdowns of movies, and video games. Link in the description. ISKA, originally International Sport Karate Association, later also called the International Sport Kickboxing Association, is one of the international bodies regulating sport karate and kickboxing matches. ISKA is heavily influenced by karate. The pool of athletes competing in this very narrow fighting style is nowhere near that of boxing or kickboxing. These types of kickboxers typically do not do well in MMA. Because of that, Tate himself lost at the amateur level in MMA. Successful representatives of this style can be counted on the fingers of one hand. Michael Page and Raymond Daniels are now active. Most kickboxing and Muay Thai legends, top fighters or prospects have not even participated in ISKA events. These tournaments are rather semi-professional for those who could not get into the major leagues. For example, the same Raymond Daniels was repeatedly beaten in Glory, which is the main promotion in our time. Glory's level is so high that even Israel Adesanya failed to win the championship belt. Perhaps ISKA was a top league at the beginning of its existence and only got worse towards the end? The short answer is no. From the early 90s to the mid-2000s, K1 was the main kickboxing league. In those days, the best kickboxer was not called World Kickboxing Champion, but K1 Champion. The level of opposition was so high that even if you were eliminated in the first round of the tournament, you were still respected and considered the elite of kickboxing. As an example, the legendary Melvin Manhoff, who has never been a K1 champion, has his best result in the semifinals. But the very fact that he got there made him a legend in the eyes of the fans. Another K1 legend, Zambides. He was an ISKA belt holder in the 90s, but he was never a K1 champion. He was mostly eliminated in the quarterfinals. To make it clearer, being an ISKA champion is like in MMA being a Bellator or ONE FC champion. You ask, what is it? And I will answer you, exactly. In the world of MMA, there is only one title that matters, and that is the UFC belt. Of course, becoming a champion in Bellator or ONE FC is difficult, but this will not make you an undisputed champion. You'll be considered another regional champion. While we're on the subject of ISKA, Glory, and the UFC, let's compare the most recent examples of how kickboxers from these leagues have performed in the UFC. The most famous example is Israel Adesanya, who never managed to become a champion at the Glory, but managed to become the second most successful UFC middleweight champion after Anderson Silva. His opponent from the days of kickboxing, Alex Pereira, became a two-weight champion in Glory and became the UFC champion in just 4 fights. The ISKA is currently represented by Hannah Goldie, whose success has been mixed. In her last fight, she lost by knockout to Molly McCann. She's part of a dynamic duo with Paddy Pimblett, but as a fighter, she struggles to make it to the top 20 in the UFC, and yet she managed to knock out the former ISKA champion in the first round with no problem. As a result, it is strange that Andrew focuses so much on ISKA, because his title in Infusion is more valuable. However, it happens that neither the record nor the opposition, promotion, or league can fully demonstrate the talents of an athlete. So let's delve into this issue. Professional opinions about Tate. To start with a more negative statement, British martial arts pioneer and former UFC middleweight champion Michael Bisping said, "Tate is an accomplished kickboxer, and he claims a record of 76 wins with 9 losses. He also said that he has only been knocked out once, where in fact my sources tell me that he has been stopped at least twice." Bisping deliberately stopped and seemed to not want to continue to develop the topic by turning his attention to Jake Paul. But the fact is that even colleagues in kickboxing have never heard of its existence. For example, one of the best kickboxers of our time, Gabriel Varga, Bellator kickboxing champion, Glory champion, and ISKA champion. Gabriel was not flattering about Tate's resume, and also openly ridiculed his advice for kickboxers.
I cannot stand when people act like they know how to fight, but they really don't. And then they go on and try and teach people or convince them they're experts in the sport. And now we have this guy, Andrew Tate, talking about how to guard up with his gloves and how it just doesn't work. Okay, let's look at this.
People who don't fight have this idea that you just keep your gloves up to protect yourself, but the problem is that doesn't work. Punch 20%, right? If I'm actually going, just like, your face will be a mess. So the idea that you just cover up doesn't work, because if I'm landing knuckle, I'll break all the bones in your hand. You can't just statically stay there. You can't against someone who can't fight. But against someone who's big who can punch, you're gonna get fucked up. You have to move.
Okay, yes, absolutely. Head movement is ideal. It'll work better. If somebody throws a punch and I can move versus guard up, sure, do that. But to say that this doesn't work, first of all, we're not fighting bare knuckle. If this is a bare knuckle fight, a street fight, then yes, things change up dramatically. But to talk about having a glove on, and if you hit somebody, you're gonna slam the knuckles against their head, you can break their knuckles, oh my gosh. And it says that this guy has something like 80 fights and only 9 losses. So little on YouTube, which is crazy, because if you legitimately have even 50 pro fights on any organization that's high level, your footage is out there. You go to YouTube and it's just gonna be scrolling and scrolling and scrolling, and you can find fight after fight after fight. This guy has so little that you can actually watch. And the one video which I did find of him actually competing in Infusion, which is a legit organization out of Europe, he gets KO'd so hard. But this Andrew Tate guy, if you were wondering, is he legit or is he just, so-so? He's so-so. He's not a bad fighter by any means, but he's definitely not a high-level pro fighter. He would get destroyed by any kickboxer who's half decent at his weight class within Glory or 1FC. Any of those guys are going to annihilate him.
Now let's talk about more positive feedback about Andrew. Israel Adesanya, who has repeatedly spoken positively about Andrew and supported him publicly. He stated that he did not know about Tate at the time when he was an active kickboxer.
Next to him, there's a lot of talk obviously about your kickboxing career. There was some talk about other opponents of yours who've come in, other kickboxers who've come in. One kickboxer who hasn't decided to go down the MMA route, still very famous, almost as famous as you, Andrew Tate. Have you been surprised to see the route he's gone down? Did you know him when he was around the kickboxing world?
Not when he was kickboxing, no. There was just a time, maybe like a few months ago, before I got canceled. Can't cancel anyone. He just started to pop up on my Instagram and on my YouTube, and I was just like, who the fuck's this guy?
This sounds doubly interesting considering the fact that Adesanya has nearly 100 kickboxing fights. He's had time to fight all over the world and under all kinds of rules. However, he didn't know about Tate's existence until he became an internet personality. This is important information since the world of kickboxing is not as big as MMA and boxing. Often local sports legends never make it to the mainstream media. But people who are passionate about this sport or are engaged in it at a professional level know about it. A striking example of popularity in a narrow circle is the drunk master Jean-Charles Skarbowski. Perhaps this name doesn't mean anything to you, but in the world of kickboxing and Muay Thai, he's known to everyone for his interesting personality and high-level skills. He even helped UFC legend Georges St-Pierre improve his skills in stand-up. However, despite all of the above, perhaps Andrew Tate really has an incredible technique, and his kickboxing career has been undeservedly bypassed. I will consider only the fights of prime Tate, and if you're interested in analyzing his last fights and how he will prove himself in YouTube boxing, let's get 10,000 likes. Technique. Andrew is a pure counter-striker. He knows how to read opponents, create feints, set traps, and provoke opponents. To be a good counter-striker, you need good physical attributes, which Andrew has. He's fast for his weight and also has good reflexes. Tate is really an athletically gifted person. Now, let's take his last title fights as an example to take a closer look at his technique. Despite his size, Tate likes to throw high kicks, push kicks, side kicks, body kicks. As you can see, all his kicks are strongly influenced by traditional martial arts, which can be found rarely in our time in kickboxing, especially in such weight class. In order to use all these kicks, Andrew needs distance, because if he doesn't have enough distance, it'll be easy to counterattack him with hands. To create distance, Tate uses the knee, often raising it. He's not only ready to check low kicks, but also creates feints. With such movements, he intimidates the opponent, showing that now he will drastically close the distance. This constrains the opponent and often allows Tate to read his opponent's reactions. Also, to create and control the distance, he uses a power jab. Andrew rarely throws something in half power. After a hard jab, he does not stagnate. He often shifts with the amplitude right straight or throws a high kick on the shift. This is another combination of traditional martial arts. UFC fighter Stephen Thompson uses it frequently. Andrew has solid head-body combinations, but they're not bad only according to kickboxing rules. Basically, he attacks the body with his legs, and with his hands he applies boxing combinations to the head. His hands look good if he's aiming at the head, but the work on the body with his hands is very weak. He either has very strong swings that opponents counterattack or arm punches, due to the fact that he's afraid that on a strong swing, he'll be caught by a counterattack. Andrew fights with his hands down, like most fighters with a base in traditional martial arts. Thus, his attacks with his hands become more unexpected, and the moment of swinging hand while throwing kick is not noticeable. After all, classic kickboxers need to remove their hand from the defense in order to swing their leg well. But as you already understand, lowered hands open the jaw for attacks. Tate tried to compensate for this with head movement and footwork, but this is where Andrew's serious style problems begin. His head movement and footwork are easily disabled by double jab and constant feints, so Tate will not understand when to use defensive maneuvers. From this follows the second problem, which did not allow him to become a truly top-tier fighter. Andrew is a pure counter-striker and needs space to work. But if you take away his space and constantly press, his style will stop working immediately. Almost all of Tate's defeats are similar. He's chased around the ring and he cannot find space for counterattacks. Part of it is not Andrew's fault, but his coaching staff's. This flashy, unorthodox fighting style is unfortunately doomed. Martial arts have long found the answer to such flashy counter-strikers. Take Raymond Daniels, for example, who I talked about earlier. He's essentially Tate, but head and shoulders better at everything. But even he couldn't win a title in glory. Every time he came across a fighter with good basics, Raymond ended after one round. The recipe against such fighters is simple. 1. Pressure. 2. Low kicks. 3. Patience. Already in the second round, fighters of this style cannot run to look for space because of fatigue and beaten legs. After that, you can enter the boxing distance or clinch, where you can safely beat them up. Verdict. If you have questions, you can go to my personal Instagram. Link in the description. Andrew Tate does have kickboxing skills. He's fast for his weight and has good reflexes. His character can indeed be traced in the fighting style. He skillfully manipulates his opponents, but he lacks kickboxing basics. He's not a championship caliber fighter. Tate is a tough mid-tier fighter. If he really was a world-class fighter, he would have been willingly invited to compete in K1 or Glory, because Andrew's peak came at a time when both leagues existed. His lax work on the body with his hands will make the fights against the Paul brothers and the KSI interesting, especially when you consider his form after retirement. If you're interested in a detailed analysis of the Tate technique, let's get 10,000 likes. This video was not created to unravel or speak negatively about a person. The idea of creating this video came from Andrew Tate himself. If we call everyone champions because they once trained kickboxing or performed, we will devalue the title of champion. Andrew himself said that in this world, you need to earn everything. Things find their value if they are difficult to achieve. Unfortunately for him, he did not achieve the title of a real-world champion in kickboxing.